The man who invented television and died broke and forgotten. What if the technology you're using right now to watch this video was invented by a genius who never received a penny for it, who was crushed by corporate giants, and who died believing he was a failure? What if I told you that the man who gave humanity television ended his life broken, alcoholic, and erased from history? His name was Philo Farnsworth, and if you've never heard of him, that's exactly what the most powerful corporations in America wanted. This is the story of how a 14-year-old farm boy from Idaho conceived the fundamental technology that would change human civilization, and how the giants of industry stole his invention, destroyed his reputation, and left him to die in obscurity while making billions from his genius. The vision in a potato field. The year was 1921. Philo Farnsworth was 14 years old, guiding a horse-drawn harrow across his family's potato field in Rigby, Idaho. Back and forth, creating parallel lines in the dark earth. It was monotonous work, the kind that lets a mind wander. But Philo's mind didn't wander to normal teenage concerns. It wandered to electrons, magnetic fields, and the challenge that had obsessed scientists and inventors for decades: how to transmit moving pictures through the air. The existing attempts at television relied on mechanical systems, spinning discs with holes, whirring motors, elaborate contraptions that could barely produce a fuzzy image the size of a postage stamp. Philo had read about them in science magazines, studied every article he could find. He knew the mechanical approach was fundamentally limited. As he guided the horse across the field, creating those parallel lines, a vision struck him with the force of revelation. What if you could scan an image the same way, line by line, not with mechanical parts, but with electrons, invisible particles that could move at nearly the speed of light, controlled by magnetic fields? In that moment, in a potato field in Idaho, a teenage farm boy conceived of electronic television. The basic principle he imagined, scanning an image line by line with an electron beam, is exactly how television would work for the next 80 years, until digital technology replaced it. When he excitedly explained his idea to his high school chemistry teacher, Justin Tolman, the teacher was skeptical, but intrigued enough to let Philo use the blackboard to diagram his concept. Tolman saved that diagram. It would later become crucial evidence in the most important patent battle in technological history. The impossible made real. Philo Farnsworth was brilliant, but he was also desperately poor. His father died when Philo was 18, leaving him as the family's primary breadwinner. He worked odd jobs, attended Brigham Young University briefly, and all the while, his television system evolved in his mind, becoming more detailed, more refined. By 1926, at age 19, Philo had managed to convince a few California investors to back his work. They had no idea what he was talking about. Something about image dissectors and cathode ray tubes. But his passion was convincing. They gave him $6,000, an enormous sum at the time. Philo moved to San Francisco and set up a small laboratory. He was 20 years old, had never finished college, and was attempting to solve a problem that had stumped the greatest minds in physics and engineering. His team consisted of himself, his wife Pim, who managed the books and often served as the first test subject, and his brother-in-law Cliff. For 18 months, Philo barely slept. He survived on coffee and sandwiches, working 20-hour days, hand-building every component of his television system because nothing like it existed. The image dissector camera tube had to be blown from glass. The receiver tube had to be carefully constructed with exactly the right coating to produce light when struck by electrons. One mistake, one miscalculation, and months of work would be wasted. His investors were growing nervous. They'd poured in more money, eventually totaling $25,000, and had seen nothing but a skinny young man muttering about electrons and magnetic deflection. Then came September 7th, 1927. Philo invited his investors to the lab. He positioned his image dissector camera at one end of the room, pointing at a simple image, a straight line painted on a piece of glass. At the other end sat his receiver. He turned on the power. On the receiving screen, glowing faintly but unmistakably, appeared the line. Philo rotated the glass, and the line on the screen rotated. He had done it. He had transmitted an image electronically, with no mechanical parts, just as he'd envisioned in that potato field 6 years earlier. "That's it?" one investor asked, disappointed. "A line?" Philo smiled. His assistant Cliff later recalled his response. "Yes, but this is just the first line of many." Philo Farnsworth, at age 21, had invented electronic television. Enter the giant news of Farnsworth's success began to spread through the scientific community, and it reached the ears of David Sarnoff, the ruthless head of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA. Sarnoff was building an empire. RCA dominated radio and held thousands of patents on radio technology. Sarnoff understood that whoever controlled television would control the future of mass communication and make unimaginable fortunes. He had no intention of letting some farm boy from Idaho stand in his way. RCA had its own television research program, headed by Vladimir Zworykin, a Russian émigré engineer. Zworykin had been working on television for years with limited success. His mechanical systems were clunky and ineffective. In April 1930, Zworykin visited Farnsworth's laboratory in San Francisco. He claimed to be interested in seeing Farnsworth's work. Philo, proud and naive, gave him a complete tour. Zworykin took detailed notes, asked probing questions, and examined every aspect of Farnsworth's television system. 3 days later, Zworykin returned to RCA and began developing television equipment that was suspiciously similar to Farnsworth's designs. Sarnoff then made Farnsworth an offer. "Sell your patents to RCA for $100,000. It seemed like a fortune to a young man who'd grown up poor, but Farnsworth's advisors urged caution. These patents could be worth millions, even billions. Philo refused. Sarnoff was not accustomed to hearing no. He made a decision that would destroy Farnsworth's life. If RCA couldn't buy the patents, they would simply take technology, claim it as their own, and bury Farnsworth in legal battles until he gave up or went broke. Thus began what would become the longest, most expensive patent litigation in history up to that time. The war of attrition RCA's strategy was brutally simple. Claim that Zworykin had invented electronic television first. Flood the patent office with applications. Challenge every one of Farnsworth's patents. File lawsuit after lawsuit. Use RCA's vast legal resources to drag Farnsworth through years of depositions, hearings, and trials. RCA was one of the most powerful corporations in America, with virtually unlimited resources. Farnsworth was an independent inventor with a small company and limited funds. It wasn't a fair fight. It was corporate warfare designed to crush innovation. The legal battle consumed Farnsworth's life. From 1930 to 1935, he spent more time in lawyers' offices and courtrooms than in his laboratory. The stress was enormous. His young company was burning through money on legal fees. Investors were getting nervous. And worst of all, RCA was continuing to develop and demonstrate television technology based on Farnsworth's principles, while claiming it as their own. Sarnoff had the media connections to shape public perception. He arranged for demonstrations of RCA's television at the 1939 World's Fair in New York. President Franklin D. Roosevelt appeared on an RCA television broadcast, the first time a sitting president had been televised. The public was told that RCA and Vladimir Zworykin had invented this miraculous technology. Farnsworth's name wasn't mentioned, but Farnsworth had one crucial advantage. He was right. His patents were legitimate. His invention was real and documented, and he had that diagram from his high school chemistry class, proof that he'd conceived the idea in 1921, years before Zworykin's work. In 1935, after years of litigation, the U.S. Patent Office ruled in Farnsworth's favor. His patents were valid. RCA would have to license his technology if they wanted to manufacture televisions. It should have been Farnsworth's greatest triumph. Instead, it was a Pyrrhic victory that would lead to his ultimate defeat. Victory. In name only, RCA refused to pay. They continued stalling, filing appeals, and dragging the case through higher courts. Finally, in 1939, after a decade of legal warfare, RCA agreed to a licensing deal. They would pay Farnsworth royalties for the use of his patents. But there was a catch. Farnsworth's key patents would begin expiring in the mid-1940s. He would only collect royalties for a few years, and RCA made sure that the deal included a gag order. Farnsworth couldn't publicly discuss the terms or the fact that RCA was paying him. Then came World War II. Television production halted as American industry shifted to military manufacturing. Farnsworth's company converted to making radar and other military equipment. The war years, when he should have been collecting royalties on every television manufactured, produced no televisions at all. By the time the war ended in 1945, most of Farnsworth's patents had expired or were about to. The post-war television boom, when millions of sets flooded American homes, happened just after his patents expired. RCA and other manufacturers made billions. Farnsworth received almost nothing. The stress, the legal battles, and the injustice broke him. Farnsworth began drinking heavily. His health deteriorated. His company struggled and eventually failed. The man who had invented television couldn't even afford to manufacture televisions himself. He lacked the capital to compete with giants like RCA, Philco, and Zenith. The forgotten genius. By the 1950s, television had become the dominant medium of American culture. Nearly every home had a television set. The industry was worth billions. David Sarnoff was celebrated as a visionary, often credited in popular media as the father of television. Vladimir Zworykin was honored with scientific awards and praised in textbooks. Philo Farnsworth was forgotten. He spent his later years working on other inventions, nuclear fusion, radar technology, but nothing captured the public imagination like television. He grew increasingly bitter, drinking more heavily, suffering from depression. His wife Pim later said that watching television in their home was often painful for Philo. He would stare at the screen, the technology he'd conceived in a potato field, the device he'd brought into the world, and silently mourn what had been stolen from him. In 1957, Farnsworth appeared on a game show, I've Got a Secret. The premise was that celebrity panelists would try to guess the contestant's secret. Farnsworth's secret was, I invented electronic television. None of the panelists guessed it. Even when given hints, they couldn't fathom that this nervous, unknown man had created the technology that was revolutionizing society. The viewing public, watching on televisions based on his patents, had no idea who he was. It was perhaps the cruelest irony of his life, appearing on television anonymously to claim credit for inventing television while nobody recognized his achievement. The final years, Philo Taylor Farnsworth died on March 11, 1971, at age 64. He died in Salt Lake City, far from the centers of technology and innovation he'd once inhabited. His obituary in the New York Times was brief, just a few paragraphs noting that he had contributed to the development of television. Contributed to, as if he were one of many rather than the primary inventor. At the time of his death, Farnsworth held over 300 patents in various fields, but he died with little money. The royalties he might have earned from television, the invention that should have made him one of the wealthiest men in America, had been largely denied to him through corporate maneuvering and legal attrition. His wife Pim spent decades after his death trying to secure his legacy, giving interviews, writing letters, fighting to ensure that history would remember her husband's achievement. She lived to see some progress. In 1983, a monument to Farnsworth was erected in Rigby, Idaho. In 1990, his image appeared on a U.S. postage stamp. In 2002, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. But ask most Americans who invented television, and if they have any answer at all, they'll likely say Thomas Edison or RCA or simply, I don't know. Farnsworth's name remains obscure, known primarily to technology historians and patent lawyers. Why this story matters. The tragedy of Philo Farnsworth isn't just about one man's stolen glory. It's about a pattern that repeats throughout history. Independent inventors, working from passion and curiosity, create breakthrough technologies. Then corporations with vast resources swoop in, claiming credit, filing endless lawsuits, and using their control of media and capital to write themselves into history as the innovators. Farnsworth's story reveals the dark side of American innovation mythology. We love tales of garage inventors and self-made geniuses, but the reality is that our legal and economic systems often favor established corporations over individual innovators. Patents, meant to protect inventors, become weapons in legal wars of attrition that only the wealthy can afford to fight. Television went on to become perhaps the most influential technology of the 20th century. It shaped politics, culture, entertainment, and social movements. The device you're using to watch this video, whether it's a smart TV, computer screen, or phone, descends directly from Farnsworth's invention. Every screen-based technology, from computer monitors to smartphones to stadium jumbotrons, uses principles that Farnsworth pioneered. The profits from television technology have totaled in the trillions of dollars across nearly a century. Farnsworth received a tiny fraction of what he deserved, probably less than $1 million total from his invention that changed the world. David Sarnoff died wealthy and celebrated in 1971, the same year as Farnsworth. His obituaries praised him as an architect of the electronic age, a visionary who brought television to America. The irony was complete. The man who stole television died famous. The man who invented it died forgotten. A belated recognition. Today, there's growing recognition of Farnsworth's achievement. A statue of him stands in the U.S. Capitol's National Statuary Hall, representing Utah. His story has been told in books, documentaries, and even an off-Broadway play. The house in San Francisco where he first transmitted an image electronically is marked with a plaque. But these memorials, however well-intentioned, cannot undo the fundamental injustice of his life. They cannot give him back the decades he should have spent celebrated and financially secure. They cannot erase the bitterness, the alcoholism, the depression that consumed him as he watched others profit from his genius. Farnsworth's story is a warning about how we treat innovation and inventors. It's a reminder that patents and legal protections mean nothing if they can be circumvented by corporations with deeper pockets. It's evidence that our mythology about innovation, the lone genius in the garage who becomes a billionaire, is often a lie designed to obscure a darker reality where corporations steal ideas and rewrite history. The next time you turn on a television, watch a video, or look at any electronic screen, remember Philo Farnsworth. Remember the farm boy from Idaho who saw the future in parallel lines across a potato field. Remember the young man who built the impossible in a San Francisco laboratory. Remember the inventor who was crushed by the very system meant to protect him. Remember him because the corporations that destroyed him worked very hard to make sure you wouldn't. And perhaps by remembering, we can build a future where the next Philo Farnsworth doesn't end up broke, broken, and forgotten, while others grow rich from his dreams.